You call this food? Sheikh Khalid Al Rashid's voice echoed through the marble dining hall, his face crimson with rage as he swept his arm across the table, sending a plate of perfectly seared duck breast crashing to the floor. Standing across from him, completely unmoved, was Naomi Carter, a 43-year-old black woman in crisp chef whites, her expression calm as still water. Her dark eyes met his without flinching, without fear, without the trembling desperation he had seen in every other chef who had stood in this exact spot. This was the moment everything changed. But to understand how a woman from Southside Chicago came to stand unflinching before one of the wealthiest men in the Middle East, we need to go back 6 weeks to the day Naomi's world fell apart. She had owned a small soul food restaurant in her neighborhood for 15 years, a place where grandmothers brought their grandchildren, where the collard greens were slow-cooked for hours and the cornbread was made from her own grandmother's recipe. It was not fancy, but it was loved. Then the developer bought the entire block. Naomi's lease was terminated, her savings were gone, and at 43, she found herself unemployed with her daughter Maya's college tuition due in 3 months. The International Placement Agency seemed like a joke at first. They specialized in placing American chefs in wealthy Middle Eastern households, and they were desperate. Sheikh Khalid Al Rashid had gone through 22 chefs in 18 months. The pay was extraordinary, $15,000 per month, but no one lasted more than 2 weeks. He was impossible to please, demanding, cruel, and seemed to take pleasure in humiliating the people who cooked for him. Naomi almost said no. She had pride, decades of experience, and no interest in being some billionaire's punching bag. But Maya's acceptance letter to medical school sat on her kitchen counter, and the first semester cost $40,000. Sometimes survival requires swallowing pride. She took the job. The palace was not actually a palace, but a sprawling compound in Dubai, all white marble and gold fixtures, with a kitchen that cost more than Naomi's entire restaurant had been worth. It was equipped with every tool a chef could dream of, imported ingredients from around the world, and a staff of servers who looked at Naomi with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The previous chef, a Frenchman named Philippe who had trained at Le Cordon Bleu, warned her on his way out. "He is not looking for good food," Philippe said, his accent thick with bitterness. "He is looking for someone to break. He wants you to fail so he can feel powerful. Nothing you make will be good enough, because the food is not the point. Control is the point." Naomi listened, thanked him, and got to work. The first dinner she prepared was a test. She knew. She made what she was asked for: a traditional Arabic feast with lamb, saffron, rice, hummus, and fresh bread. She executed it perfectly, using techniques she had learned and adapted over years. When Sheikh Khalid sat down to eat, surrounded by business associates, Naomi watched from the kitchen doorway. He took one bite, placed his fork down, and called for her. "This is garbage," he said coldly, not even looking at her. "My grandmother cooked better than this when she was blind. You are dismissed for the evening." His associates laughed, and Naomi returned to the kitchen, her jaw tight but her mind working. Over the next 3 weeks, Naomi cooked everything the sheikh requested: French cuisine, Italian, Japanese, traditional Emirati dishes, modern fusion. Every meal was rejected. Sometimes he would not even taste it before sending it back. Sometimes he would eat half and then declare it inedible. He never raised his voice during these early weeks, which somehow made it worse. His cruelty was cold, calculated, designed to erode confidence slowly. But Naomi had survived worse than a spoiled billionaire. She had raised a daughter alone after her husband died. She had kept a business alive through recessions and neighborhood violence. She had cooked through grief, through exhaustion, through days when she wanted to quit everything. A rich man's insults were not going to break her. What Naomi did during those 3 weeks was observe. She noticed that Sheikh Khalid never finished any meal, but his eyes would linger on certain dishes before he rejected them. She noticed that he ate alone most nights, despite having a wife and 3 children who lived in a separate wing of the compound. She noticed that the kitchen staff whispered about his mother, who had died 2 years earlier, and how he had not been the same since. And she noticed something else. In the corner of the massive kitchen, there was a small, old notebook written in Arabic. One of the younger staff members, a kind woman named Fatima, translated pieces of it for Naomi when asked. It was a collection of recipes, handwritten, with notes and modifications. Fatima's voice was soft when she explained. These were his mother's recipes. She was the one who taught him to love food. She was not trained, just a woman who cooked from the heart. When she died, he could not bear to eat anything that reminded him of her, but he also could not bear to eat anything that did not. Naomi understood then. This was not about satisfying hunger. This was about satisfying grief. On the night of the 4th week, Naomi made a decision. She stopped trying to impress the sheikh with technique and started cooking to heal him. She took one of his mother's recipes from the notebook, a simple chicken stew with okra, tomatoes, and spices. But she did not just follow the recipe. She added elements from her own grandmother's cooking, the slow patience of soul food, the understanding that some dishes are not about complexity but about love translated through time and tradition. When she served it that night, Sheikh Khalid looked at the bowl with suspicion. "What is this?" "This is your mother's recipe," Naomi said quietly, her voice steady, with respect added. He stared at her, and for the first time, something flickered in his eyes that was not contempt. "You dared to touch my mother's recipes?" His voice was dangerous, but Naomi did not step back. "Your mother cooked with love. So do I. That is the only thing that matters." He picked up the spoon, and the room seemed to hold its breath. He tasted the stew. Then he tasted it again. Then he put the spoon down and looked at Naomi with an expression she could not read. "Get out," he said quietly. Naomi left, uncertain if she had just saved her job or ended it. The next morning, she was summoned to the dining hall again. The sheikh sat at the head of the long table, and this time, his wife Amira and his 3 children were with him. "Cook the stew again," he said. "For my family." Naomi did. She prepared the dish with the same care, the same intention. When the family ate together, really ate together, for what the staff whispered was the first time in months, Naomi saw something shift. The children laughed. Amira smiled. And Sheikh Khalid, the man who had terrorized 22 chefs, ate every bite on his plate. After that night, things changed. But not in the way Naomi expected. The sheikh did not suddenly become kind. If anything, he became more demanding. But the nature of his demands shifted. He wanted her to teach him to cook, to show him the techniques his mother had known instinctively. He wanted to understand why food tasted different when it was made with patience instead of speed, with intention instead of obligation. Naomi became not just his chef, but something like a teacher, though neither of them used that word. She showed him how to knead dough, how to know when meat was perfectly cooked by touch, how to balance spices not by measurement, but by intuition. And slowly, as he learned to cook, he learned to grieve. But the real transformation came 6 weeks after Naomi arrived. On the night that opened this story, Sheikh Khalid had invited important business associates for dinner, men who judged everything by excess and cost. He instructed Naomi to prepare an elaborate feast, the kind of meal designed to impress rather than nourish. Naomi refused. She stood in that kitchen and told the sheikh, through Fatima, who translated nervously, that she would not cook food meant to show off. She would cook food meant to feed souls, or she would cook nothing at all. That was when the sheikh exploded. He stormed into the kitchen, something he never did, and screamed at her in front of the entire staff. "You call this food?" He pointed at the simple dishes she had prepared, variations on his mother's recipes, elevated but not extravagant. "I pay you to cook what I demand, not what you decide. You are a servant, nothing more." The staff froze. This was the moment every other chef had broken, had apologized, had either quit or been fired. Naomi looked at Sheikh Khalid, and her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it carried through the kitchen like a bell. "I am not a servant. I am a chef. And a chef does not cook to impress people who do not understand food. A chef cooks to nourish, to comfort, to connect. Your mother understood that. Somewhere inside you, you understand it too. That is why you have been so angry. You have been trying to fill a hole that fancy food cannot fill." The silence that followed was absolute. Sheikh Khalid's face was red, his hands shaking with rage. But beneath the anger, Naomi saw something else. Recognition. Pain. The truth he had been avoiding for 2 years. He stared at her, and the room waited for the explosion, for her to be thrown out, for consequences. Instead, Sheikh Khalid turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word. The dinner that night was served as Naomi had prepared it. Simple, honest food, made with care. The business associates were confused, having expected extravagance. But Sheikh Khalid ate with his family, and he told his guests in Arabic that Fatima translated for Naomi later, "This is the food of my childhood. This is the food my mother made. If you cannot appreciate it, you do not deserve to eat at my table." Some of the guests left offended. Others stayed and ate, and some of them came back to the kitchen afterward to thank Naomi for a meal that reminded them of home. After everyone had gone, Sheikh Khalid returned to the kitchen where Naomi was cleaning. She expected anger or perhaps grudging acknowledgement. Instead, he spoke in careful English. "My mother died while I was closing a business deal in London. I did not make it back in time to say goodbye. I have been punishing everyone since then, especially anyone who tried to feed me, because eating without her felt like betrayal." Naomi dried her hands on a towel and looked at him directly. "Eating is not betrayal. Forgetting is betrayal. Every time you eat food made with love, you honor her. Every time you reject it, you reject her memory." Sheikh Khalid nodded slowly, and for the first time since Naomi had arrived, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a grieving son. "Will you stay, not as a servant, as someone who understands?" Naomi thought about Maya, about the tuition that was now paid, about the contract that still had 6 months remaining. But more than that, she thought about purpose, about the strange way life connects people who need to learn from each other. "I will stay," she said. "But you need to understand something. Good food requires honesty. If you want to eat well, you have to live honestly. No more performing for people who do not matter. No more hiding from grief. You feed your soul or you stay hungry. Is that clear?" Sheikh Khalid, a man accustomed to giving orders, not taking them, smiled slightly. "Clear." Over the months that followed, the compound transformed. Naomi taught the sheikh to cook, really cook, and he began preparing meals with his children. The kitchen became less of a workplace and more of a gathering place. Amira, who had been distant, started joining the cooking sessions, and the family that had been fractured by grief slowly knit back together over chopped vegetables and stirred pots. Naomi also began training other staff members, teaching them techniques and recipes. The compound kitchen became known among other wealthy households, and several staff members left to start their own catering businesses, with Naomi's encouragement and Sheikh Khalid's financial backing. He funded a culinary school in his mother's name, free for anyone who wanted to learn, with Naomi as the director of curriculum. But perhaps the most significant change was in Sheikh Khalid himself. He stopped collecting chefs like trophies and started valuing the people who worked for him. He paid better, treated staff with respect, and became known not as the impossible employer, but as someone who understood that wealth meant nothing without humanity. When Naomi's contract ended, Sheikh Khalid offered her a permanent position as head of his family kitchen with a salary that would have made her wealthy. She declined. Maya was graduating medical school, and Naomi wanted to return to Chicago to open a new restaurant, one that combined soul food with the Middle Eastern techniques she had learned. Sheikh Khalid understood, though he was disappointed. Before she left, he gave her a gift. It was his mother's original recipe notebook, carefully preserved and translated into English. On the first page, he had written in careful script, "For Naomi, who taught me that the best food is made by people who understand that cooking is an act of love, not performance. Thank you for feeding my family. Thank you for feeding my soul." Naomi returned to Chicago with enough money saved to open her restaurant without debt. She called it Two Grandmothers, a place where her grandmother's collard greens sat on the menu next to Sheikh Khalid's mother's chicken stew. It became a neighborhood institution, a place where people from different backgrounds came together over food that was made with the kind of honesty Naomi had insisted on in that Dubai kitchen. Maya finished medical school and opened a clinic 3 blocks from the restaurant, providing healthcare to the same community that had supported her mother's business for years. And sometimes, late at night, after the restaurant closed, Naomi would sit in her kitchen and think about that moment when Sheikh Khalid had screamed at her, when she had refused to back down, when she had chosen truth over submission. The impossible thing she had done was not about cooking technique or secret ingredients. It was about refusing to participate in someone else's grief performance. It was about insisting that food, real food, requires honesty from both the cook and the person eating. It was about understanding that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is remain calm in the face of rage and speak truth to power, not with aggression, but with unwavering clarity. Years later, Sheikh Khalid visited Chicago with his family. They ate at two grandmothers, and he introduced Naomi to his children as the woman who saved our family by refusing to let us stay broken. The children, now teenagers, hugged Naomi and thanked her for teaching their father to cook, something they said had changed everything in their home. As the family left, Sheikh Khalid turned back one more time. "You told me that day that good food requires honesty. You were right. But what you did not say is that honesty requires courage. Thank you for having the courage to tell a powerful man the truth he needed to hear." Naomi smiled. "Thank you for having the courage to listen. That is the part most people cannot do." Before we wrap this story up, I'd like to thank you for reaching this far. And if you enjoyed this story as much as I think you did, then be sure to show your support by liking and subscribing so this channel can reach more people like you. Now, back to the story. The story of the chef who satisfied the unsatisfiable billionaire spread in certain circles, always told slightly wrong, always missing the key detail. People thought it was about some secret recipe, or exotic ingredient, or culinary miracle. But those who knew the real story understood it was simpler and harder than that. Naomi had done the impossible not by being the best chef technically, but by being the most honest one emotionally. She had seen past the anger to the grief, past the wealth to the wound, and she had refused to play the game of performance that everyone else had participated in. She had cooked not for a billionaire but for a grieving son, and in doing so, she had reminded him that food at its best is not about impressing anyone. It is about connecting to something true, something real, something that transcends wealth and status and power. In the end, the lesson was not just for Sheikh Khalid, it was for Naomi too. She had learned that her worth was not determined by where she cooked or who she cooked for, but by the integrity she brought to her work. She had learned that standing firm in the face of rage is not about being confrontational, but about being grounded in truth. And she had learned that sometimes the people who seem the most impossible to reach are simply the ones drowning in pain they do not know how to express. The impossible thing was choosing compassion without compromising dignity. It was recognizing another person's humanity while insisting on her own. It was cooking with love for someone who had forgotten what love tasted like, and in a world that often mistakes cruelty for strength and submission for service, that might be the most impossible thing of all. Years later, when culinary students asked Naomi about her time cooking for Sheikh Khalid Al Rashid, she always gave them the same answer. The best meal you will ever cook is not the most complex or expensive. It is the one where you have the courage to tell the truth with every ingredient, every technique, every choice you make. Cook honestly or do not cook at all. Everything else is just performance. And somewhere in Dubai, in a kitchen that once represented tyranny and grief, a family still gathered to cook together, honoring the memory of a grandmother through the lessons taught by a woman from Chicago who understood that sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to participate in someone else's brokenness. That is the impossible thing. That is the thing worth doing.